Big law has a reputation for being a collection of sad young lawyers slaving away for evil old partners, all while making a pretty nice salary. And that might be true at some big law firms, but what do big law attorneys actually do? In this video, I'm gonna go over what I do as a big law attorney, so let's get into it. Now to start off, I have to clarify the difference between a litigation versus a transactional law practice. When you're working in big law, or really any law firm for that matter, you're generally gonna be in one of two camps, either on the litigation side of things or on the transactional side of things. Litigation would refer to lawsuits, while transactions would mean something where you're transferring ownership from one party to another, or you're drafting contracts and agreements and those sorts of things. And at least in my experience, these two camps don't really merge together very much. They're kind of their own islands doing their own sorts of things, and that's largely because the focus of each practice area is pretty different. Transactions tend to be more amicable in that both parties generally want the same thing. One is trying to sell and another is trying to buy, and both parties want the end result of a completed transaction, though you can certainly run into plenty of hiccups. But the incentives to complete the deal tend to be pretty aligned. Both parties generally have a similar objective. Whereas with litigation, it tends to be more of a battle between both sides, since both sides do not want the same thing. That's why they're in litigation. So those two practice areas are already very different in that sense. Now, as for my practice, I'm a commercial real estate attorney. I'm on the transactional side of things, so I'm not really dealing with any litigation. But within both the litigation and transactions categories, you're gonna have a ton of different little subcategories of different practice areas like real estate, corporate, mergers and acquisitions, and tons of different things just within transactional. And then under litigation, you might have insurance, criminal defense, appellate advocacy, and a bunch of other different sub-niches as well. But you can usually break down each sub-niche even further. For example, I said I'm in real estate, and I'm dealing with a bunch of issues within real estate, which is a pretty broad topic in itself. And being a relatively new associate, since I'm nearing the end of my second year as a full-time attorney, I'm still looking at quite a few issues as I learn and develop my practice. Now, the sub-niches that I work on and continue to work on are as follows. For one, I have leasing, which is a pretty big category, and that's for a variety of different types of buildings as well. We're talking about data centers in some cases. I've done quite a bit of work on that. But then there's lots of retail properties as well, especially for restaurants. I've done quite a bit of leasing work for restaurants in particular, but also more broadly, we have industrial properties and shopping centers, so broader retail categories. But that's a big part of my practice. It's leasing. And the second biggest thing that I work on are purchase and sale transactions, so where one party is selling to another one. That's both on the buyer and seller side. In my case, most of my time in this area has been in retail shopping centers, so maybe a developer builds a shopping center and then sells portions of that shopping center, so you have multiple transactions to get through. And then there's also standalone sales of individual properties, but since this is in the commercial space, the deal size tends to be quite a bit larger than, say, a house or something like on the residential side. And I've worked on deals ranging from a couple $1 million in purchase price up to tens of millions of dollars, so the deal size can vary pretty widely here, but the work tends to be pretty similar in either case. There just might be more of it for a bigger deal with more things involved. So that's the second biggest area. Now, a third area that I've done some work on, but admittedly not too much, is financing, or if you've been to business school, financing. So this work would be on loan documents, typically representing the lender, or in some cases the borrower as well, and going through the various loan documents there, making sure that things are in line for a loan transaction, and sometimes that could go alongside with a purchase and sale transaction. And that's often because there's a loan involved, so you have to make sure that everything is set up there. But like I said, I haven't done too much financing work myself. Now, another category would be development and redevelopment. Now, this is kind of a combination of the other factors we've already talked about. Typically, there's going to be some serious financing involved with a development, and you're going to have purchase and sale transactions as the developer tries to offload that property, or they're leasing it up before they sell it, which is often the case. So there can be quite a bit of leasing work as well. And a good amount of the work that I've done over the past couple of years has been when a client wants to know whether they can develop something on a property or not, or if they want to redevelop an existing property, taking a look at the various restrictions that might be on that property, telling them what they can or can't do. So that is a pretty big area of my practice so far. But like I said, there's a lot of overlap with the other areas because you're dealing with quite a few similar issues. Now, I will say a couple things that are not in my practice area would be tax and zoning issues, and that would be relevant to a development, but we typically would go to local counsel for that. Now, these issues tend to be really localized, and you really have to be an expert on that specific small area of the law in that specific area, especially when it comes to zoning. You often have to be on really good terms with the zoning board or something for each particular city or county, and that can be a huge hassle if you don't already have a bunch of experience and a bunch of connections in that area. But often for these local issues, we'll refer to other attorneys within the practice because we have multiple locations across the country and across across the world, so you can ask those people to see if they're familiar with local restrictions. So that's one big advantage of being at a big firm, is that you often have people in many different areas of the country who may be familiar with very specific local laws there, and that can help in a pinch. Now, the final area of my practice would be miscellaneous weird projects that probably are just a one-off thing, but aren't really a part of any of the other areas that we've already discussed. For example, I've done some very specific signage projects, or I've put together some management agreements to manage a particular sublease of a building. It might fall under leasing, I guess, but the point is these projects tend to be really unique. And I'd say I have the most fun with these because they require me to get creative and really try and solve whatever the problem is the client needs, while actually using more creative thinking skills rather than just kind of putting puzzle pieces together, which is all well and good. But it is fun to try and tackle a new issue that you haven't seen before and that you don't have a lot of documents that you can pull from, so you have to really get creative in solving it. But overall, for my practice, it's a ton of reading and writing, and that's generally going to be the case in any area of law. I'm reading documents all the time, seeing what the restrictions might be, drafting things, so you have to be really clear and concise in your writing. In many cases, you're going off of a form and you're adjusting the form from there, sometimes in huge ways, so there's still quite a bit of writing even though you have a form and it's all ready to go. But generally, you'll have negotiation between both parties, and then once those negotiations are finished, you can go and start drafting something or adjusting the draft of something. And then the goal is to make both parties happy, but really you want to make your client happy because they have hired you. As for my day-to-day routine, I have posted a couple of day-in-the-life videos from the past couple of years, both when I was back in Chicago. I'm now in Houston, and you see the Chicago skyline behind me, but I am in fact in Houston, working for the same firm, which has an office in Houston, and I was actually working with a number of these Houston attorneys before I moved from Chicago, so it was a really seamless transition in that sense. I did have to pick up a Texas law license, which thankfully was easy enough. I just had to make the application, they did a background check, and they took my passing score from the bar in Illinois, so it was pretty easy, all things considered. But my job is generally the same, so check out those day-in-the-life videos if you're curious. But in general, I work at least a few hours per day every day of the week, so that's 7 days a week that I'm trying to bill something just to try and stay on top of my billable hours requirements. I'll get to those in a second. My general target is 5 to 6 billable hours per day, so that would come out to around 40 billable hours per week. Though things change from week to week, and they can change pretty dramatically, and that's part of the challenge of big law. Every now and then you'll have some really demanding weeks or even months where you have a huge transaction, or more likely multiple transactions that you have to juggle, and you have to make sure that you're not disappointing your client by missing deadlines or whatever it is. So you have to make sure you do that work well, and that can just take a lot of time. So sometimes you have those 70 billable hour weeks. They have been pretty rare in my couple years of practice, but they do come up. And to clarify, billable time is only time that you can bill to a client, which is not all of the time that you spend working, unfortunately, for us attorneys. Ultimately, clients determine the pace, and sometimes partners can determine the pace, but that's really because the client will demand something of them, then the partner will pass it on to an associate or a few associates, depending on what's going on with the deal. But either way, that makes it kind of hard to plan for the long term because you never really know what's going to come up, and you're being paid to be able to jump on those issues as they come up. Which brings me to the annual hours requirement that is so notorious in big law. Personally, I have to hit 1,950 billable hours in a year to be able to advance to the next associate level. And the next associate level is just a promotion up to the next tier of associate, and there's generally multiple tiers of associate before you reach partner.
I want my name on the door.
Every big law firm does things a little bit differently, but they generally all have around a 2,000 hour billable requirement for all of their associates. And if you meet those requirements, then you should be able to advance and get promoted, and you might be able to get some bonuses as well. Many firms offer guaranteed bonuses for hitting certain hours requirements. If you go above and beyond that minimum 2,000 or whatever it is, you often can get a bigger bonus. But bonuses tend to rely on whatever the firm's financial performance is anyways. Now, in addition to those billable hours, you're required to do what's called CLE, or continuing legal education, and these are courses that you need to keep your license. So you get enough hours for each year, and then you renew your license, and you just need to make sure you stay on top of those things, but it's hours you have to spend regardless. And you're definitely encouraged to do things to build your practice as well, especially networking, so that's something that I definitely do as well. Looking for the long term, I want to make sure I'm making great connections, not only for law, but really just for all things in life and business. So I do want to keep meeting new people in and around the real estate space in many cases, but also in adjacent or not adjacent spaces as well, because you never know how you might be able to help someone or how they might be able to help you. And my firm does encourage things like being in networking groups, and I think any firm would, because the more you can be out there, the more chances for bringing in potential business you'd have. Overall, my big law practice definitely is a lot of work, and it's a pretty wide range of stuff as well. And it's definitely made me a better investor in the meantime, because I get to see how some of these big players are doing deals and how they're structuring things, and it pays well.